This month I've been reading children's literature and non-fiction, and because I couldn't decide on which theme to go with, I decided to combine the both, and so I've read children's fiction and children's non-fiction. On saying that, this first book doesn't fit into either of those categories, and the only way that I could think that might work is to say that it's about a man desperately trying to hold on to his youth. But that's about as desperate as me trying to shove this book into children's literature or children's non-fiction, because it definitely isn't. And that book was The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. I finished this one in November, but I started it at the end of October as part of my scary reads theme. It's about a man who has his portrait painted, and the portrait takes on sort of the bad characteristics of himself, and it ages and all of his sins show up on it, whereas in real life he remains really youthful and beautiful. It's a really interesting look at that selfish side of human nature. As you're reading it, you're reading about Dorian's fall. You just can't help but be entertained by that. So I think the book has a kind of bad influence on the reader in the same way that the characters and a book in this book have a bad influence on Dorian. And of course, Oscar Wilde is the king of quotes. He just has this way of saying things that makes him sound so wise, and you can't help but agree with what he's saying, even though a lot of the time when you really look at a quote, it doesn't actually make that much sense. Sometimes it's a bit like, come on, you're stretching that a little bit. And one of the only criticisms I have of this book is that it's pretty anti-Semitic. There is a not very nice portrayal of a Jewish man in this book. But overall, I gave this one a 5 out of 5 stars. It's a really great short classic that I would recommend to anyone. And the way it all wraps up in the end is just perfect. The second thing that I finished this month was actually a children's fiction book, and that was The Wolf Wilder by Catherine Rundell. This is about a young girl who is able to detrain wolves. So instead of making a wolf tame, her and her mother, their trade is that they make a wolf wilder. The character herself is very wolf-like and a little bit on the wilder side. She's a bit of a tomboy. But one day they get on the bad side of some soldiers and things go bad from there. This is a great wintry tale. It's perfect because it's set in Russia and you just get that really cold, snowy kind of feeling. But I wasn't quite sure what to think about this one because I kind of wanted it to be a little bit more fantastical, because it felt like it was sort of leaning that way but not quite getting there, or to make it a bit more realistic. I don't know, I just felt it was a bit on the fence. I think that as a kid I really would have enjoyed this story. The characters are really sweet. I especially liked her friend, and I also really like the wolves and all of their different personalities. Overall, I gave this one a 3 out of 5 stars. I think it would be very enjoyable for kids, but I don't think it's one of those children's books that are enjoyable to all ages. The next thing I finished was my first non-fiction read of the month, and that was Brown Girl Dreaming by Jacqueline Woodson. This is a book written in poetry, in verse, and it is about Jacqueline as a young girl growing up in both the South and the North of America in the 1960s, I think. I really enjoyed this. I actually listened to it as an audiobook, and I think hearing the author herself read out the story was just really nice. What I liked about this was that it really puts you in, and you just experience all of those same frustrations and joyful moments and disappointments, and you kind of feel like you're part of the family. I think those were my favourite parts, where she was describing her family and the things that they got up to. Just feel like you're there. Though this is kind of a portrait of Jacqueline Woodson's life, it's also able to explore racism in that time era and the activist movements as well that were going on at the time. And she is a child, so there's a sense that she doesn't fully understand things that are going on, and especially why. It shows the different ways that racism affected her and her family, and it also shows the different ways it can manifest itself in just their day-to-day lives. I actually gave this one a 4 out of 5 stars. I would really like to get hold of an actual physical copy of the book at some point, because I feel like sometimes with audiobooks I can miss things because my concentration isn't the best, especially when I'm travelling on public transport. It can get a bit difficult. Actually, I keep thinking of like my favourite part of this book, but I really loved when she started to discover her love of writing, and that just connected with me so much. Like when she gets her first notebook and just the clean pages just make her feel so excited and happy to have it, and her sister doesn't really understand it, but yeah, I just really love that bit. And I think that's why this book highlights to me why I love reading so much, or why I enjoy reading really good books, because I love it when I can be reading about somebody who has a completely different life to the one that I do, and yet there's always going to be that one thing that connects you and a character or a person in a book just because they wrote it down and you read it. It's just magical. That's why I love reading, and that's one of the reasons why I love this book. If you haven't read this already, definitely check it out. The next thing I read went back to that wintry theme that I had going on earlier, and that is Winter's Tales by Larry John. It is stories of winter from around the world. So different mythologies and legends, folk tales, that kind of thing. Now, I really love stories where we get to find out why a thing is the way it is. So these stories all kind of deal with how winter came into being in different cultures, and I know that this is one that I would have loved as a kid because I really enjoyed Just So stories by Rudyard Kipling, and that's kind of the same thing. I just find it so interesting and love that people kind of have to come up with explanations for things that they don't understand and how they use imagination to do that. Something else that I really liked about this was that it shows different perspectives on winter. So most of the stories sort of saw winter as a very negative thing, but some of the more hotter countries actually see it as a really positive thing. As always though, with short story collections and things of that nature, there are going to be stories that you just don't enjoy as much as others. I also thought that sometimes some of the word choices were a little bit weird, like it just felt a little bit too modern to go with the stories, but it is written for modern children, so that does kind of make sense. I gave this one a 3 out of 5 stars. So that leads me to my second non-fiction of the month and the last non-fiction, and that was The Diary of a Young Girl by Anne Frank. Now, I read this as a kid, I think, but I couldn't remember it, so I went to the library and I was trying to find the version that I remembered, and I remember that it was a lot shorter than this. I read the beginning, and apparently the first edition that was published was actually kind of curated by Anne Frank's father. So there's been a dramatic lighting change because my camera decided to not charge up when it needed to, and here we are. So apparently Anne's father only released the full version of Anne's diary close to the end of his life, and the version that I knew about before was only a partial account. For some reason, I wasn't expecting this to be the diary of a teenage girl. This is much more to do with coming of age and the teenage experience, and we see Anne just growing as a person. It just so happens that she's having to do this in hiding from the Nazis. Anne is really funny quite a lot of the time, and she is very confident in herself. She knows what she wants, and she says that multiple times. As the diary progresses, you really get to see her reflecting on how she was a year ago and how she is now, and how she's working to improve and get better. And you also start to see her understanding of feelings and emotions. It is really just the diary of an ordinary teenage girl, and I think that's what I really liked about reading this. I can't really say that I enjoyed this because, as we all know, Anne's family was found and only her father survived in the end. And all the way through, Anne talks about how once the war is over, she's going to do all of these things, and there is just such an optimism and a hope to her and a positivity that I think is really incredible and inspirational. This book really explores how low humanity can get, but it also explores how good people can be as well. She's so confident and yet so vulnerable at the same time. I can't imagine going through what she went through at the age of 13 and 14. And it's easy to forget that as well, because this is so well written, and she always says that once she gets out of the situation that she's in, she'll become a writer. She really wants to write books. And I can't help thinking that if she had survived, she would have gone on to write many more fantastic stories. There's a lot that I'm taking from this book in terms of positivity and courage. I sobbed my heart out at the end because it's so strange, because you're reading a book, you kind of expect there to be a build of tension, and it's obviously not as dramatic as that. It's just that the entries stop and then it goes on to explain what happens to the family after that, and by that point you have really got to know these people and you really are very fond of them, and to know what happens after that is just completely devastating. So in the end, I gave this book a 5 out of 5 stars. I would highly recommend that you read this. And finally, on a much lighter note, the last thing that I read this month was Peter Pan by J.M. Barrie. I'm so sad that I missed out on this as a kid. I love the film, the Disney version. Somehow the book has beat it. I was kind of worried that I wouldn't like the original, but it is amazing. So this is the story about a boy called Peter Pan who never grows up. As many people say, this book is a lot darker than you expect going into it if you've never read it before. Peter himself is sort of a little dictator among the Lost Boys. The portrayal of childhood in this is absolutely perfect, and it's written in a kind of way where it's like, this is how it is, we're moving on now, deal with it. And that really matches the idea of make-believe, and that's how children play. When you're little, you just say, well, actually this is how it is, and that's just accepted and everyone moves on. That was just captured so perfectly in this book, especially in the interaction between the children and the narrator as well. I love that the narrator kind of actually takes you by the hand sometimes and is addressing you. You're sort of part of the story. There's one part where they say, okay, let's go back to London and see what Mrs. Darling is getting up to, except we can't interact with her because we were just made to stand back and watch. Peter Pan is such a good character. He's obviously really cocky, really selfish. Like I said, he's a bit of a dictator in this book among the Lost Boys, but there's something about him that is so charming, and I don't know how J.M. Barrie did it, because he tells us that that's how Peter is, but he also managed to write him in a way where he really actually is like that, even to the reader. And I love the ridiculousness of the adults in the story, like Mr. Darling. They're almost like giant kids themselves. Most of all, what I love about this book is that it just captures the imagination. It really does transport you to this other place, and I think in the book it's even more imaginative than it was in the film. It's almost more like magical realism in a way, because in the book it's kind of described as this place that is always within us and is sort of part of our dreams but not really, and it's a bit more difficult to define exactly what a Neverland is. It just makes you want to be a kid again. It makes you want to never grow up like Peter and live in Neverland forever. And on top of that, it's just a great adventure story. My only criticism of this book is that the portrayal of the Native American characters isn't well done at all, so I'd be warned of that going into it. Although I do still love Tiger Lily as a character, and Tink as well. Tinkerbell is just my favourite. I just really, really love this book. It's so good. It's definitely gone on my favourites list for this year. I gave this one a 5 out of 5 stars. So next month I'm planning to read fantasy books. We'll see how many I get through because they're usually quite a bit longer than your average book. I'm also planning to read more graphic novels and comics. So that's all for this wrap up. Thanks so much for watching. Like, comment, subscribe if you want to, and I'll see you all next time. Goodbye!